Salutations Rangers, General Rally 101 back again with some more lore. So real quick, picture this. A Space Marine, slowly stalking their prey. Over months, they have used deafening cacophonies of noise, terrible illusions of imagination, and the frightening dread that comes from slow, crippling anxiety. Slowly but surely, for weeks at a time, they have solely pried apart their enemy, fraying each and lost delicate nerve, waiting for the final time to strike. And finally, when the enemy is brought to the precipice of psychotic collapse, these vicious terror troops burst forth in a frightening cacophony of violence and death, finally putting the poor bastard to rest. And as this terrible figure emerged, blade dripping, bolter dry, skull face gleaming, we find ourselves with the Primaris Marines. More specifically, the Primaris Reaver. You were probably expecting someone else, weren't you? If you were, I wouldn't blame you. But that does beg the question and the whole point of today's video. The Primaris Reaver is a very interesting unit, but surprisingly it's a unit that the 40k fandom seems to have ignored for one reason or another. Well, not for one reason or another, they're pretty shit on tabletop. Or they have been, notoriously. Ever since their release, they've never really been good. But for one reason or another, this particular unit of the Primaris has escaped the cultural zeitgeist of the entirety of the Warhammer 40k fandom. For one reason or another, we just don't gravitate towards this marine. Which is very, very, very odd, because this marine goes against everything that the Primaris stand for, and some would argue it's one of, if not the most grimdark aspect of the Primaris Space Marine. But then, if it's so grimdark, and it's what people have always wanted, because the biggest complaint about Primaris Marines is that they're not grimdark enough, they're too clean, they just don't hit that grimdark itch. Well, Reavers do. But if Reavers are indeed grimdark Primaris, why is it that we as 40k fans don't like them? And that also begs the question, why are terror troops part of the new implementation of Bobby G's system? Why do Reaver Marines exist? Well, we're gonna find that out today in today's video. So, strap on in, buckle up, and let's get cracking on with today's video. The Primaris Reaver Squad, as dictated in the stipulations of Codex Astartes 2.0, is a close support melee squad that is meant to support the main battle line effort of the Intercessors. Reavers are Vanguard deployment Space Marines, meaning that they deploy in the van, much like reconnaissance squads and scout squads. However, whereas with those squads, they're meant to gather information, perform surgical strikes, and then report back to the main force to help aid the invasion, Reavers, their job is a little different. They, like other Vanguard Space Marines, will deploy weeks if not months before the actual invasion. But they're not there to gather information, they're not there to make surgical strikes, and they won't be going back to the main invasion force. They're going to stay there, for their goal is not to gather information, nor is it to assassinate high-ranking targets, though they may do that from time to time. Their goal is to quite simply cause chaos. The Reaver squads are indeed designated as a terror troop. Terror troop in this context, and pretty much every context, refers to a unit that is designed to specifically sap and destroy the enemy's morale, their fighting spirit, hence weakening their overall war effort so that when the main invasion force arrives, they have an easier time. But specifically with the Reavers, they are meant to target the base human fear that comes from fighting a super augmented transhuman, aka the Space Marine. Because old Jim with his lasgun may be a good shot and everything, but if he sees 1,000 whatever pound God Almighty knows how much big chunky red armored suit of God Almighty finesse fuck you coming at him at Mach 10, he's not exactly gonna stand and fight. And you know what? I don't blame him. Good on you, Jim. The Reavers are said to make note of all types of psychological warfare. Specifically in the speaker grills, it's not exactly their voices that come out. They are meant to change them to sound as animalistic roars or insane cacophonies of debilitating noise. So you can either sound like a goddamn dragon or static. In addition to this, they have inbuilt tracking systems that are meant to specifically be able to hack into information-based networks, i.e. Vox traffic or all types of communication sharings. They are meant to get information about where troops are, what they're doing, who's doing what, what's going where, maps, everything in between. And then they will then use that information not to destabilize the enemy in terms of a command structure or make surgical strikes, but rather to simply break them down. They also have holographic technology, meaning that they oftentimes will use holographic illusions to aid in their combat. TLDR, the Reavers are going to find some poor bastard infantry regiment and they're just going to fuck with them. They're going to make loud noises, they're going to use flashbangs, which are called shock grenades, which are meant to blind people and burst eardrums, which they do indeed do, and they are meant to utterly destroy this unit in terms of its morale, basically rendering it combat effective because all the bastards went insane. But one thing that really does separate these fellows from other types of terror troops or infiltrator units is that when the big bad happens, when the big invasion comes, these fellas, they don't slink back, they don't rejoin. They instead will launch a shock assault on their chosen target, or a target that the High Command has deemed of value. So they'll run in with bolt pistols as well as combat knives and, again, as I said, flashbang grenades, and kill and murder and destroy the enemy. They are the first strike, and they're meant to hit something, hit it hard. And that hard target has usually been weakened over the course of weeks, if not months. All in all though, Reaver squads are terribly effective, but they have one glaring issue, and that's the aftermath. Generally speaking, most people who are a victim of Reaver assaults usually end up dying, which is indeed kind of a mercy because many often than not, any type of mortal who has ever survived a type of Reaver assault is often left psychologically broken. They literally go insane, because it's Space Marines doing terror warfare. And it's the same issue that the Night Lords had as well during the Great Crusade. The Night Lords may be great at bending a population for a day, but that sheer amount of psychological trauma and fear only lasts ever so long. You can't exactly build a stable place out of it from there, hence why Reaver squads are generally speaking used sparingly, but they're only used in specific targets that are deemed necessary. And here we come to the crux of today's video. Why is it that Reaver squads exist? Well, they exist because they're effective. Plain and simple. The big issue with a common misconception that people get about the Night Lords is that they're not effective. The Night Lords were effective in their given role, i.e. getting a population to submit. The problem was, why the Night Lords were not known as an effective legion overall is because they didn't have anything else going for them. That was literally it. Their command structure, everything in between, the way they operated, the logistics, there was just nothing else other than just the terror troop aspect. Meaning there was no support, there was no build-up, there was no reinforcement, it was all just terror. And as I said, terror can only take you so far. But the Reavers in context of the Codex Astartes are brilliant. They do what they need to and they launch a devastating strike and they render a very vital, very core part of a unit's defense absolutely wrecked. And when you combine the fact that they are supported by other Vanguard Space Marines as well as the main invasion fleet in of itself, we can see that terror used as a tool needs to be backed up. And when it's backed up, it works quite well. So from the pragmatic standpoint, yeah, they exist because they're very bloody useful. But another question then, why would Guilliman make these part of the new codex? All of the Primaris Marines were created under Guilliman's authority, so which means Bobby G had to sign off on this being created. Guilliman is a pragmatist. If you know anything about Bobby G, you'll know that. A perfect example are destroyer cadres. During the Great Crusade, destroyer cadre was essentially a war crime space marine. They were only used during destroyer operations, and they were very effective. Guilliman openly disliked them. He denounced them, and he really just did not enjoy the idea of them. But he did indeed keep them because he saw that they were useful. The Nemesis chapter was indeed one of the few units on Calth who could withstand against the Galvorback and other demonic entities. The Nemesis chapter being the Ultramarines' only destroyer cadre. So we know that Bobby G is pragmatic. The thing is though, why would he dedicate a unit specifically to this purpose? The normal Space Marine can indeed do terror tactics. The normal Vanguard Marine can indeed do terror tactics. Again, as I mentioned before earlier, a Space Marine is a Space Marine. You don't exactly have to be trained in how to scare motherfuckers. But why is it that Bobby G felt that he needed specifically a unit dedicated to terror warfare? A unit that is very similar to some units that the Night Lords Legion had. Bobby G has made it very clear to call no heresy nonsense. None of the traitor Primarchs can be used in Gene Seed, and he wants to stay very clear away from anything and all related to the traitors. Yet if Bobby G has made that distinction, why would he include a unit that is so terribly Night Lordy? More specifically, the fact that the Vox grill of the speaker helmet of the Reaver Marine can be changed to sound like anything, which is something that the 8th Legion did specifically. Also, the skull helm. The Night Lords were known for adorning their armor not just with skulls but any and all types of bone talismans or trophies. Now granted, eventually that would become any and all human gore and the Reavers aren't there yet, thank god, but it does raise the question, why do they exist like this? And, ladies and gentlemen, that's because of a very, very little important thing. Control. The biggest issue with the Imperium is that it's decentralized. There are a million worlds, and when you consider that communication is done through a mutant, you can't exactly phone home to see how things are doing every day. When Guilliman was restoring the Imperium, and when he was creating the Primaris and everything in between, when he came back, he was assaulted by rebellion after rebellion after rebellion. including the own High Lords of Terror during the Hexarchy Crisis. Guilliman, from his time as a statesman, also knew that rebellions were the leading cause to an empire's downfall. He knew that one needed to be able to assert control over an area if they wanted to succeed in governing it. But with the nature of the Imperium, it being so decentralized, asserting control is pretty hard. So, let's say though you get a planet. The planet has rebelled. You need to conquer that planet and you need to do it quickly. But how do you do that? How do you control a populace of 1,000,000 worlds? And, much like the 8th Legion, you make an example of them. The reason why the Reavers exist is because sometimes you just have to scare somebody. You gotta scare them so good, so terribly, so badly, that when they tell the next person they meet and that person sees the look of horror and shock on their face, they'll think twice before opposing you. Terror has been used throughout the entirety of history, by good and bad people alike. Why? Because it's effective. People will only mess with you if they think they have a chance. And generally speaking, they'll only think they have a chance if they believe that they are just as strong or stronger than you. But if you have a terror troop come up and you show them just how weak they are, they're going to double take a minute, and they're not going to challenge you, at least not openly. It is my theory, it is my belief, that with the Space Marine Reaver squads, Bobby G created them specifically the way that they were, because he knew that at certain times, certain folks would only respond by quite simply being scared. Instead of sending 10,000 Space Marines to conquer a world, you send a few squads of Reavers. The Reavers will hunt down the capital city. They'll plague it and plague it and plague it until it finally breaks, then they'll launch a vicious shock combat assault. And that is when they will cut off the head of the snake, quote unquote, they'll execute the governor, and will occupy the world. In combination with the rest of the Vanguard elements, they will then come through, and with the main Space Marine force, they'll establish a new leader, and anyone who has any ideas about rebelling against this, well, one, the main Space Marine force is here, so that's a no-go, and they remember the terrifying gurgled screams of those who died under the Reaver's blade. Space Marine Reavers are basically pragmatism made manifest. Guilliman is a great guy. He honestly wants the best for the Imperium and he wants the best for humanity. But he is a pragmatist at the end of the day. He knows that some people will only learn if taught a lesson, regardless of how many times you may speak to them. And sometimes, fear is the best teacher. Not always, not most of the time to be fair, but there are a very, very, very few lessons that can only come from having the shit scared out of you. And ultimately, that's what the Reavers are. They are teachers of lessons. They are horror made manifest. They are the terrifying reality that you are nothing when compared to a Space Marine. And honestly, that's very grimdark. Guilliman, being a statesman, understanding that everything needs to be right and genuinely wanting to do good, but in the same vein, understanding he lives in Warhammer 40k and sometimes being nice just ain't gonna cut it. So he takes a page out of his brother's book. A brother which he hated, a brother which he despised, and a brother which fucked up some of his city, but he's a pragmatist so he still recognizes it can do work. And here we see, in the 42nd millennium, Guilliman trying his best to restore the glory of the Great Crusade, is using a tactic and a horror from the devastating Horus Heresy. Now, I don't know about you, but to me, that sounds very, very grimdark, or at least close to grimdark, depending on how pedantic you want to be. But then that begs the question, why is something that is objectively not good at the very least, and very grimdark at the very most, something that we 40k fans just don't gravitate towards? Space Marine Reavers are something that you just don't hear talked about. No one really cares about them. So then that begs the question, why don't we 40k fans care about this? Well, I could wax on poetically about us not just really wanting to like Primaris, not really going on about them, and not really giving them the time of day. I could go on and on about how at the end of the day, people just want to hate Primaris, so they're going to hate it, and if they find something that actually is pretty cool, they're not going to really like it, and then on and on about the division of camps, etc., so on and so forth. But realistically, there is one core reason why people have never heard of Reavers, why people don't like Reavers, and why Reavers just generally don't get anything in the spotlight. They suck on the tabletop. 40k at the end of the day, for now, is still a tabletop mini-game, and Reavers consistently have been absolutely horrible on the tabletop. Since they're so bad, people don't care about them. They underperform in the tabletop, no one talks about them. No one talks about them, they don't get any love. They don't get any love, they stay being not loved. Simple as. And it's a compounding effect, it's that simple. Now look, there is some truth to it. Some people don't like the Primaris, some people will never like Primaris out of principle alone. It doesn't matter if you have something like a Reaver, which is generally speaking, in my opinion, rather cool, but at the same time, objectively, not really super clean and pretty grimdark. They're terror troops, that's always going to be dark. And some people will just never like them, because they don't like Primaris. Again, out of principle, not because of any type of practicality. But the fact of the matter is, they've never been good, and people have never had really a reason to like them. So, you have the tabletop crowd who've never liked them because it's always been rubbish. And you have the lore crowd, half of them just dislike them out of the sole fact as they're Primaris, and the other half, well, they don't really care about them. Because again, they're not really super Primaris-y. So ultimately, with Reavers, they come into this weird place where basically every part of the fandom has a reason to dislike them, and that reason to dislike them, generally speaking, overrides their reason to like them. Which is a damn shame if you ask me, because they're a cool unit, bro. Like, yeah, they're terror troops, like, I mean, yeah, Skullface, ooh, they're edgy, but at the same time, it's like, it's terror. They're always going to be some type of edgy. And ultimately, when I look at them, I think that the Reavers, generally speaking, could indeed be a bridging gap between people who love Primaris and people who don't like Primaris. Because the people who like Primaris, they're still Primaris Marines. At the end of the day, they still have that going for them. And for the people who don't like Primaris Marines, well, they're not exactly your standard Primaris. So I think they really could fit the bridge. But that's only if GW actually decides to make them useful. Who knows, maybe GW will buff the fuck out of them and suddenly they'll become everyone's favorite Primaris unit. Maybe, I don't know. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so very much for watching. I do genuinely appreciate it. Let me know down below, what do you guys think about Reavers? Do you guys think that this is generally a case of the 40k community being kinda dumb and not really seeing them? Do you think it's a case of them not really getting enough love for them to see them? Or do you think that they're just one of the sad units that people have forgotten because Space Marines have too many units? Love to hear your thoughts down below. But I want to say a massive thank you to you guys for watching, even more massive thank you to my awesome members and patrons. And massive shout out to my Officer Corps, my Lieutenant Tiers. Shout out Mr. Eddie V3 and Miss Major of the Void. Big shout out to all my Sergeant Tier fellas. Mr. Damiak, Mr. Andy McGee, Mr. Warsmith the Fireheart, Mr. Codes Butcher, and Mr. Sean IRL7. Shout out to my corporate team members, Mr. Bowen and Tremail the Math Kitty. And finally, but certainly not least, big shout out to my private team members, Mr. Thomas Moslons, Mr. Ivan _SBW, Mr. Hattori's Curse, and of course, Mr. Monkey Man. And very big shout out to my Patreon members, Mr. Fortress Unum, General Alexander, and Mr. Bowen. Thank you guys from the bottom of my heart. It means the world to me that you guys do this, and goddammit, I just love you to bits. But remember, this will always be free. Whether you give me $1 or not, I will love you just the same as you. Just watching it is more than enough for me. Mwah! Yes, it is. But ladies and gentlemen, I've been the General Bradley 101. You've been beautiful, awesome, and amazing people. Thank you all so very much for watching. Make sure to stay resolute out there, boys and girls. And I will catch y'all next time. Dismiss Rangers. Bro, it is so wild to me that people still vehemently despise Primaris after like 8 years. Like, yeah, I get it, bro, but come on, 8 years, my guy, move on.